I've got some good news. In 2007, military insider Robert Leroy Horton and his military friends were worried about the banking crisis and researched with their security clearances who was responsible. They found two men by the name of David Wynn Miller and Russell J. Gould, where they found syntaxes in the bundled mortgage contracts, and they sued for grammatical fraud. They took their findings to court, and they won. Now in trouble, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac bundled them up and sold them to Bank of America. 3 days later, Bank of America found out they were sitting on bad paper and sold those to Wells Fargo. And that is how the fire sale started with these phony derivatives and the 2008 crash. David Wynn Miller and Russell J. Gould were the key to exposing the biggest national security secret in United States history. Let's take a step back and find out how they figured this out. After the American Revolution War, the 13 colonies filed their first bankruptcy of the United States. There was a post office downtown in Philadelphia known as the Benjamin Franklin Post Office. It was open until the war started. All war vacates contracts. Keep that in mind. Because the 13 colonies were not a state or nation of their own, they had to close that post office down because they were fighting for their national statehood. After the war, the post office couldn't be opened back up for commerce because it owed 1.6 million francs to France because they funded the American Revolution to begin with. The King of France was arguing with Spain as to who is going to assign a Postmaster General for that post office. Why is that important? Well, Spain claimed they had Christopher Columbus, who found America first and had the rights to it, while France argued that, hey, without loaning the francs, America wouldn't even be open for capture. But the King of Great Britain, still being the reigning monarch, told both countries, Britain will put their Postmaster General in. America agreed because they were familiar with how Britain operates. And rather than France and Spain, they're just different countries. They didn't really do much commerce with them in that sort of a control fashion. Great Britain then paid off the loan to Spain. They purchased the land that is now called District of Columbia and sent their Postmaster General there because it was sovereign land for Britain to operate. If any other country wanted to rape and pillage America for its goods, they would have to go through Great Britain, Washington, D.C., and fight them first. Therefore, all commerce shipped to and from the colonies, Britain got a big cut. So they felt like they had control. The Founding Fathers had a pact that they would never borrow money from the central bankers, like the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank. And that's because those bankers owe no allegiance to any monarch. And monarchs are only as powerful as their armies. So in case of war, they could beat them and not have to pay it back. Later, during the second bankruptcy of the United States, unfortunately, President Abraham Lincoln, after the colonies were broke in half, leaving only the North and the South, violated the Founders' Pact and borrowed money from the international central bankers. That initiated the second financial bankruptcy that led us to the 1933 Federal Reserve Act, the Depression, and the Great Stock Market Crash, which gave the elites absolute power over American citizens. The question that Robert Leroy Horton and his friends, as they were doing all of this research, what they had was, why was there still a syntax grammatical error key on every single mortgage document, and what gave it the power to utilize these mortgage contracts as not fraudulent? How do they even make money? Well, who gave that authority? Your birth certificate. That's right. The U.S. filed for their third bankruptcy on March 9th, 1933. Roosevelt paid off the debt to the International Monetary Fund with all of its gold, your gold. The Federal Reserve Act used the United States citizens as collateral by a private bank called the Federal Reserve, which controlled the U.S. currency by offering loans and profiting off the interest. The loans that didn't get paid back would be given to the American people to pay off, which is called the national debt. Their birth certificate, issued in all caps, if signed by the mother, she basically lawfully agreed to give her baby's life to the Federal Reserve and pay taxes to those private bankers. No one had a clue. On November 2nd, 1999, that entire system of human collateral came to an end when the bankruptcy of 1933 came to an end. The post office in the District of Columbia, owned by Britain, had closed down. The king had to vacate the position. The President of the United States was the administrator of the bankruptcy, and we no longer needed a trustee because there was no longer a bankruptcy. So the President didn't even know what was going on at that time. Britain didn't have a plan or somehow overlooked the bankruptcy. For 18 days, the post office in D.C. was vacant, and David Wynn Miller and Russell J. Gould saw an opportunity to get our freedom back. They had an understanding of the ports, wartime law, maritime law, land law. And with that knowledge, Russell went to the Pentagon and asked if they had a copyright patent on the Title IV flag of the United States. Russell captured the flag and took it to the United Nations immediately. And they said, all of the land on planet Earth has been taken. So what land do you want to choose, Russell? He chose the land of the courts during the time of the contracts, meaning the post office was still shut down and there were no contracts with the highest courts in the United States. The United Nations gave him the authority to be the Postmaster General of the United States, and he kept the evidence and allowed the continuance of commerce open under his authority and no longer under Great Britain. He just seceded the United States from Great Britain's rule. What's funny is the Navy was sitting in all of their foreign ports at that time without a flag because Russell had just taken it. Bill Clinton was in Kosovo when he was informed that the Title IV flag had been captured by Russell. The Navy signed on with Russell in 2003. I mean, there's so much more to the story. It's amazing. Russell J. Gould quietly became the Commander-in-Chief and Postmaster General of the North American continent, which is the United States and Canada. And the reason why is because Canada had always been attached to D.C. Russell owned it. By this time, the U.S. banking constitution came to an end as well. Russell proposed a quantum construct which could track the entire finance and commerce with digital tokens, which inspired cryptocurrencies to this day. Donald J. Trump and the White Hat generals used Russell's accomplishments to take down the deep state. We owe our life to these two men who, by an act of God, removed the deep state's power from the citizens of the United States in such a funky way. And that is why there's such a huge push to make people nationalists right now, by removing themselves from the old guard. This is great news. And when I wrote this today, I was reading this information that I found, and it really makes sense to me. And I'm really proud and happy that, our God loves us so much that just through loopholes like this and people who are paying attention literally can take back a nation just through capturing a flag, getting a piece of paper from the UN, and then bringing it back and claiming the rights. And that's what he did. I'll update you more on this story later.